Good morning, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Applications Committee on Wednesday, the 15th of December. This meeting is being live streamed and will be made available on the Council website for public viewing. Could I remind members to follow the good practice guidance, which includes muting microphones and switching off their video when you're not addressing the meeting. Should you wish to contribute to any item, you should write speak in the Teams chat function and you'll be invited to speak in order about new issues. Should your question or issue be raised by a previous speaker, please withdraw your request so that you can deal with the business as efficiently as possible. The usual standing orders apply, including that any votes will be undertaken by roll call. If any member has to leave the meeting for any reason, can I remind you to either leave the Teams meeting for that period of time, or you could write leave in the Teams chat function and then write join when you return. This will allow us to monitor members' presence. Clark, can you confirm the sediment, please? And I do approve remote participation of members that are not in the council chamber today. Thank you. Tracy?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. We've got 15 members present. We've got 14 members on Microsoft Teams and 1 member present in person at Council HQ, which is Councillor Thompson. We've got 4 members not present at the start of the meeting, being Councillors Crothers, Councillor Giusti, Councillor Lever and Councillor Tate, and 1 apology from Councillor Sloan.
Councillor Lever sent me an apology earlier this morning. Tracy, my apologies for not forwarding that to you. So if you can confirm that Councillor Lever's also apologies today, I'd be grateful.
Yes, thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Tracy. Are there any declarations of interest, members? Andy Ferguson, please.
Item 4, I'm very well acquainted with one of the objectors, so I'll excuse myself from that item, Jim.
Thanks, Andy. Henry McClellan, please.
Hello there, Chair. Yeah, it's an item 4. I know one of the objectors, but he worked with a previous employer of mine, but I wouldn't say it was any other than the relationship other than just know the person. So I don't think that affects my ability to take part in item 4, Chair.
Thanks very much, Henry. I think a large proportion of members in this meeting will have had dealings with a gentleman who was a previous employer of the council, employee of the council, including me. I've had dealings with him on many occasions, but not that preclude me from the meeting. I have
sorry, Chair. Sorry, I wasn't meaning the council employee. It was one of the objectors that a note from his objection is going to be read out, Chair. Sorry, just to make that clear.
Thanks very much, Henry. No, my apologies. I was just assuming that it was the same person. We all have had dealings with one objector, and there's not one that's listed.
Yeah, sorry, of course, there's him as well, sorry.
Archie Driver, please.
I think you've covered mine, Jim, on that one.
Thanks very much, Archie. Jane Maitland, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, I know one of the objectors slightly, but I do not think that my relationship is such that to remove myself.
Thank you, Jane. John Martin, please.
Much the same, Chair. I think you've covered it.
Thank you, John. David City, please.
Morning, Chair. Morning, members. Yes, pretty much the same as I'd stated for a previous application at the October meeting. For item 4, I do know the applicant in his professional capacity as a painter and decorator. I also know 2 of the objectors to this application who are either previous or current council employees. However, I consider my involvement with these parties is such that I remain able to provide impartial planning advice to the committee as required.
Thanks very much, David. There is, that's it. There are no more hands on show, and I think I've cleared all the meeting chat requests. So there are no other declarations of interest. We'll go to the, we should do maybe the procedure and then go to the minutes. So Tracy, can you read out the procedure to be followed today, please?
Thanks, Chair. The Planning Applications Committee will consider each application in turn as detailed on the agenda. The case officer or other appointed officer will make a short presentation addressing the determining issues, accompanied by digital images. Any late information, amendments or corrections will be reported at this time. Members may ask questions of officers following the presentation on points of clarification. The Chairman has been provided with a list of eligible representatives who have registered to speak at this meeting within the period specified in Council policy. No other persons will be allowed to speak. The Chairman will individually invite those who have registered in advance to speak to make their presentation, after which they may be questioned by committee members. No questions may be asked of members. The order of eligible parties being heard will be as follows: third parties objecting to an application, third parties supporting an application, statutory consultees objecting to an application, elected members of Dumfries and Galloway Council who are not members of the Planning Applications Committee, and such members should withdraw from the meeting after making their presentation, applicants or their agents. In line with the Coronavirus Scotland Act 2020 Schedule 6 Part 4, covering the exclusion of the public from meetings of local authorities, representatives were offered the option of joining the meeting remotely to deliver their presentation or to provide a written statement to be read out on their behalf. Presentations will be strictly limited to 3 minutes per person, except for national and major developments, which by their very nature are more complex, and the time limit will be 5 minutes. The Chairman will ask you to come to a conclusion if you take too long. Representatives are encouraged to use the time allotted to clarify any points they consider material and address the determining issues. Certain matters are not normally material planning considerations and will not be taken into account by the Council when deciding on a planning application. Representatives should not raise any new matters without explaining why they were not raised earlier with the case officer. Please do not repeat what is in the report, as members will have already read the report. After all the presentations have been heard, the meeting is then in formal session and no members of the public may address the committee. The Planning Applications Committee will then proceed to determine the application.
You're on mute, Jim.
Thanks for that, Archie. Thank you very much, Tracy. Thanks, members. Move on to agenda item 3, the minute of the previous meeting held on the 15th of December. Is that, oh, no, that'll be wrong. That's today. Meeting Wednesday, 27th of October 2021. Members, is that a true record of the meeting? And if so, are we happy to approve that?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. Move on to agenda item number 4. Mill Park Cottage, Dalton, Lockerbie. The application is full application, reference number 21/1396/full. The recommendation is to refuse, and our case officer is Carla Livingston. Carla, are you with us? And if so, would you like us to take us through your presentation, please?
Good morning, Chair. Thank you. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. The first slide shows the outline of the Dalton Conservation Area boundary, highlighted in that purple colour there. The application site is at the junction, just off the B7020. You'll see it closer when you'll have a better view when you see the location plan, which is the next slide, please. Next slide, please. The location plan shows outlines the application site, which is on the junction of the B7020 and B7525 in Dalton, which is fairly central within the village. The next slide, please. The block plan indicates the outline of the proposed dwelling house. The application site would utilise roughly half of the plot of Mill Park Cottage, utilising which is currently garden ground within the site. Next slide, please. The proposed elevations and floor plans show a relatively traditional 1.5-storey dormer cottage. Next slide, please. The proposed street elevation highlights indicates the height of the proposed dwelling house in comparison to the neighbouring dwelling houses on that side of the road, those being Mill Park Cottage and Mill House. Mill Park Cottages in the middle there. Mill House, the existing dwelling houses on the left, and the proposed dwelling houses on the right. Next slide, please. This is showing this is a photograph showing the approach to Dalton on the B7020 from the northwest. The application site would be beyond the hedgerow there. Next slide, please. Panning slightly left, you can see the old Free Church, Dalton Old Free Church, which is across the road from the application site. Next slide, please. This is a view of the site from the B7020. You can see the rear elevation of Mill Park Cottage. The next slide, please. This shows the junction of the B7020 and B725. The application site is on the corner of this junction, beyond the hedgerow. So the hedgerow there forms the boundary of the what would be the application site. You can see the side elevation of Mill Park Cottage, just beyond the hedgerow there. Next slide, please. This is a view of the site from the B725. You can see the church, which is across the road, and part of Mill Park Cottage. Next slide, please. This is Mill Park Park Cottage as existing. Next slide, please. This is a view of the application site looking northwest towards the B7020. You can see the site is relatively flat. It was grass. It looks like there's some hardcore on the site. Next slide, please. This is looking towards southwest towards the side elevation of Mill Park Cottage. Next slide, please. This is the existing street view. You can see part of Mill House and Mill Park Cottage there. Next slide, please. This is panning slightly left, looking towards the junction with between the B7525 and the B7020. Next slide, please. This is showing neighbouring dwelling Mill House. It's considered that the proposed dwelling house takes design inspiration from Mill House. Next slide, please. This photograph shows the existing dwellings that front onto the B725 within Dalton, which is probably one of the main streets within the village. Next slide, please. This shows the existing Dalton Old Parish Church, and if we can flick to the next slide, please. And Dalton Standing Stone, which are both ancient monuments which were highlighted within the council archaeologists' consultation response. Dalton Standing Stone there is across the road from the application site. Could you go back one slide, please? And the Dalton Old Parish Church is located across the road to the south of the application site. That's my presentation finished. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carla. Members, questions for our case officer today? Ivor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I note within the papers it says that there's a two-storey building. I think it'll just be diagonally across the road from the application site. Why wasn't that included within the photographs to give us a comparison of what's already in Dalton Village? So that we can actually, I think it's the pub.
Yeah, the pub. If you go back to, sorry, that wasn't intentional. It was just the photographs that I had. I did have one of that, and I don't know if it'll be on the. If you go back through our slides, please. Sorry, if you can go to the one that shows the houses that are fronting onto the B7525. Okay, sorry, it isn't on there. It's actually next door, pretty much. I think a door or two away from that site. Sorry.
Thanks, Ivor. I have Councillor McKee and then Councillor Carruthers. Councillor McKee, please.
Somebody switched my mic off, sorry about that. There was a photograph showing the street scene and then in the church at the bottom. Was there a space between the end of the houses and the church as the proposed site?
Can you flick back through them, Carla, please, to find the one Councillor McKee is asking
Next one,
about?
please. I think I know what one you mean. Back. Sorry. Was it this
That
one?
one. Aye, that one. Is that,
Yes.
that the building site on the left between the house and the church?
Yeah, so that's the application site, which is bound by the hedgerow, and then the main road is between the church and the application site. So the B7020 runs beyond that. If you go to back one more slide, you maybe get a better indication of. So that's the
that's
the
opposite
the
view.
main road.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Ian Carruthers, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can you take me back to the proposed street scene, so to speak, the three houses next to each other? It was like a front elevations we could see. Just have a look at it, just to remind myself what that looks like, please, Chair. I've got some questions on the actual report itself, but should they be left? That's just on the pictures at the moment. Should they be left to debate, Chair?
If they're for clarity, do it now. If it's an observation or part of a proposal you want to put forward, then it'll be during the debate, Ian.
I'll leave it to debate then, Chair.
Sorry.
It was almost like a sectional drawing, I think.
Yeah, you can go back a few slides. It's sorry, I'm not controlling the slides. I'm just
sorry.
It's okay. That's the one. Yep. Thank you.
I just wanted to kind of get an understanding, because you're saying that the house proposed has been developed from the house, I think on the left, which is, I forget the name of it. It's saying it's too small for me to see at the moment. No, thanks, Chair. That's all I needed for clarity. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. That one's called Mill House, I think, unless I'm wrong. I've got Pauline, please. Pauline Drysdale and then Henry.
Morning, everybody. Thanks, Chair. Cara, could you just confirm with me that Mill House, the house on the left, the elevation of it versus the house on the right, whilst I do appreciate the conservation arguments in the report, but could you just confirm, is it a higher elevation or the same as Mill House on the left? If you do know that information, that'd be helpful. Thanks, Carla.
Based on the street elevation that was submitted, the proposed dwelling house would be higher than Mill House on the left, marginally higher.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Pauline. Henry, please.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know how many times I'll have driven through Dalton, but I'm trying to remember the location of I think the property that Ivor mentioned. Would it be possible, Carla, just to bring up the village plan again and maybe give us an indication as to where this second two-storey property is, please? Yeah, I just can't quite remember.
So on this plan, you can see. I'm trying to think. The two-storey building is the pub, and it is. I think it's number. There's a number on it. I think it's number 5. It's there's a house. It's road that says it's Rose Cottage. Can you see that on the main?
Oh yes.
So it's next door to that on the left-hand side.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that, Carla.
Okay.
Thanks, Henry. Any other questions for our case officer? Ivor Hislop again, please.
Chair, are you sure that's the case? Is it not the one marked PO?
No,
which
yeah,
is
it is.
a lot
Sorry.
closer. And the photos that we actually had on the thing are the photos of the houses 5 onwards.
Yeah, sorry, that's true. Sorry, my fault. Yes, it is. It's PO. Yes.
Yes. It's opposite the Standing Stone.
Yes, it is. Sorry.
Right. So before we move on, is everybody clear where the only double-storey house in the village is? Okay. In that case, we come now to the representations. It's 3 minutes. we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 objectors, and Tracy has a statement to read out for each one. And then the applicant, there is also a statement to read out for the applicant. So if you go beyond 3 minutes in any of these representations, Tracy, please draw your statement to a close. And whenever you're ready, the first is an objection from David and Vicky Charles, followed by Fiona Dean. Oh, you probably read out the names as we go through it, Tracy. It'll make it more easy for you. So whenever you're ready, Tracy, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, first objection is from David and Vicky Charles. My husband and I moved to Kobe, Dalton in June of this year. It was our dream move to a quiet village with outstanding countryside and wonderful views from our rear garden. Our small cottage is adjacent to the proposed site. If this is passed, it will have a detrimental effect on our property. Our property is listed, the oldest I believe, and it will dwarf our small cottage, and with the small windows we have in our property, this dwelling will block light to our lower 2 bedrooms, notwithstanding the amount of large lorries that manoeuvre around the corner into the B725 to Crotherstown. We realise the first application was withdrawn due to the amount of objections. Now I believe the applicant was informed on that occasion that it was not in keeping with the village. Most are single bungalows. From what I can see, this application will still not be in keeping with the village, not to mention how it will be powered, sewage, water, heating issues, environmental concerns, plus it will be an eyesore. We are concerned about sewage and water supplies. We had an issue back in August where the sewage backflowed into our bathroom, which caused raw sewage to invade our property quite significantly. This problem came from a blocked sewer on the proposed site, and we had to call out Scottish Water to deal with the problem. The turn at this junction is already tight with many huge trucks, some articulate taking the corner too fast. If cars are pulling out of the proposed property at this junction and a car or truck must take action, they could end up on the side of our house. If anything, this piece of land could be used to move this junction across or certainly make it wider to make it safer, especially in light of the fact that vehicles are larger and moving faster around this corner and junction. Dalton is a wonderfully peaceful village. While some may think it needs revitalised, those that live here are happy with it as it is. Allowing planning permission may open the doors to other issues. There will also be issues with privacy and their second floor overlooking our rear garden and may well affect the value of our property. We will have to raise a wall to contend with this and our view will be gone. This will of course mean selling and moving again. And the next statement is from Fiona Dean. The case for refusal of this application has been strongly and clearly reasoned by written objections submitted and through the experience assessment of the case officer and other professionals invited to offer specialist comment. The negative impact of this proposal on all areas of relevant policy and guidance designed to safeguard conservation areas is unequivocally. There are 2 additional important and relevant points for the committee to consider. 1, the design statement. This did not form part of the initial submission made available to the public and was only available online after the public consultation period had concluded. Concerns were lodged with planning and advice was that there were no material amendments or new material information. This did not require extended public consultation or response. From review of the document, while the above is clearly the case, the design statement is wholly inadequate and makes no attempt to clarify the appropriateness of this site for a new building development, how it sits within or enhances any conservation context, character or need, or how it addresses any approach to design quality or environmental impact, in particular in terms to sustainability. In light of COP26 and the Council's noted commitment to the climate change, the latter is of obvious concern. So consequently, it is unclear how this proposal was allowed even to proceed or how there would have been any meaningful dialogue with planning without this necessary documentation in place. It seems contradictory to good or even acceptable practice in terms of design development or public consultation and understanding. 2. Conservation character appraisal, management plans and safeguarding. As committee is aware, Dalton has no conservation area character appraisal or management plan in place. The assessment of its latter timing and priority being based on presumed development pressures. However, in the space of less than 6 months, this small conservation area has had 2 development proposals submitted, one approved unconditionally in October and this one now less than 2 months later. For a village of this size, small, the potential negative impacts on conservation status, as has happened with 5 other villages, is very real. The proposed site is of considerable historic importance, as pointed out by the archaeologist's report. It is not just any old junction, it is at the centre of the village on a crossroads that is the historic Meerkat Cross. If negative impact on the setting of the old church and churchyard is to be avoided and the prominent position of the original medieval siting of the church is to be preserved, then architectural design quality, experience and conservation understanding is even more important, as would be an informed design statement that establishes the appropriateness of this site for any kind of building development, let alone anything smaller or lower scale. The next statement is from Paul Cosgrove. It is clear that there are substantial considered objections to this application which are firmly based on guidance, and I would urge the committee to support the refusal recommendation of the planning officer, archaeologist and the council's senior planner Built Heritage, and also to take note of the considerable contributions made by the residents of this small village. There are 2 further points I think are important for the committee to consider, and these are in relation to 1, the conservation status of the village, and 2, the climate emergency. Firstly, the conservation status of the village. There are currently 5 villages in the region that are under threat of losing their conservation status. This is a result of their status being slowly eroded by actions that don't wholeheartedly safeguard their position. For example, the erection of boundary fences that are not in keeping with the special characteristics of the village, the alteration of the village skyline by the removal of chimneys, etc. Dalton has been impacted by this already. As the character appraisal and management plan for Dalton will not be developed until 2033-34, the village is reliant on the safeguarding principles of the current guidance. I would ask that the committee please take careful consideration of these, as previously there was apparent conflation of the principle of conservation with a notion of stagnation. I feel it is important to consider the difference. Conservation is considered objective view by professionals who provide guidance in relation to regional and national policy. Stagnation would be an individual subjective view, wholly inappropriate and should bear no part in the decision-making process. Secondly, in terms of the climate emergency, in addition to the 4 grounds for refusal clearly presented by the planning officer, I would submit that a 5th could be added as follows: that the proposal is contrary to Dumfries and Galloway's Local Development Plan 2 Supplementary Guidance, Sustainability, Reducing Carbon Emissions in Buildings, September 2021, which clearly states, Dumfries and Galloway Council declared a climate emergency in June 2019, the priority of which is to urgently respond to climate change and transition to a carbon neutral region. Dumfries and Galloway Council are one of the UK's leading authorities in the fight against climate change by committing to being a net zero carbon region by 2025. Dumfries and Galloway Council agreed an action plan which outlined 12 commitments to be implemented by the Council's Climate Emergency Cross-Party Working Group. There have been new buildings in the local area that demonstrate real commitment to the ambition of these goals and aspirations. It is particularly disappointing to see a new build proposal that makes no reference to any of these concerns. Poverty of ambition, and in this application to engage with either conservation or climate emergency guidance, is truly disheartening. It demonstrates a complete lack of any design methodology in the application development process that leaves you questioning how this application even got this far in the planning process. The next objection is from Mr. and Mrs. Parisi. This is a statement that we would like you to read out on behalf of the committee on the 15th of December. Our objections have not changed regarding the erection of the above dwelling house. We believe that this building would be too big for the size of the plot it's going to be on. The design statement, which was not included in the plans when they were submitted and added much later, gives no information on what the build would be, and it gives no information on how environmentally friendly it would be, and we think it is very important with Dalton being a conservation village. We think that the proposed build does not enhance the character of the village and brings nothing to the conservation area. We also think that the size of the property would take away the natural flow of the village, meaning that it would be the only thing you will see coming in from either end of the village. We also have concerns regarding the driveway to this build. They will be turning out very close to the cottages across the road and very close to a very busy junction. Drivers coming from the direction of Lochmaben and turning to go up to Crotherstown always cut the junction, and we think this is a major hazard. Also, people taking that bend coming down the village tend to take it too fast. We think that it's a disaster waiting to happen. We would also like to state that the views over the fields and woodland that we have been very lucky to enjoy for a long time would be obscured by the size of this proposed development. We would like to finish by saying that Dalton has been criticised unnecessarily recently, which we consider to be unfair. What people should understand is that everyone that lives in the area really appreciates the history and surrounds it, and we are very proud of this. This is a quote from the late Doris Marshall's book titled All Roads Lead to Dalton. This charming, beautiful and much loved part of Scotland, and we totally agree. Thank you for taking our comments into account. And the last objection is Anne-Louise Thompson. If the building of this house was to go ahead, it would be an eyesore and completely out of character and keeping in with otherwise traditional village, which has buildings dating back to the 1700s and in what is designated a conservation area. Because of its height, it will diminish the other buildings around the junction, and the occupants will be able to look directly down into the houses opposite. There is already a tricky corner to navigate both on foot and by car. There is no pavement, nor is there a safe place outside the proposed property for additional parking. There is already often a problem when there are church gatherings and the road is narrowed so that only single file traffic can pass. Any passing traffic would have to overtake parked vehicles, and as this is so close to the junction, it would not be safe. In summary, I don't think these building plans should be approved as the house is too high, out of keeping with the local architectural and conservation village. Changes are too close to the junction, and I question its effect on the village utilities and the effect on other people's privacy. I trust that the committee will take on board the objections made by both the Senior Planning Built Heritage Policy and the Council Archaeologist. The planned proposal is so close to the old churchyard and the standing stone on the village green that it will detract from the historic appearance of the village. Allowing this proposal to go ahead would be contrary to the Scottish planning policy. It would also go against both a number of Dumfries and Galloway Council's own local development plan and historic environment policy for Scotland. And the last statement is from Mr. Lockhart, which is the applicant. Dear committee members, thank you for the time and listening to my statement in relation to the planning application I lodged some 11 months ago, and today I'd like you to consider and approve my application on the basis of the design changes undertaken and the following points. I have worked closely with the planning department and have, right up until a matter of weeks ago, accommodated all the design recommendations that have been put forward to me from the planning officers. The current design has realised considerable changes from my original application in order that this design embraces and respects the existing local village architecture. The design which now sits before you was developed with the full support of the local planning officers at the time, with the recommendations being considered and incorporated into this design. These are fully articulated with the design statement which was submitted to support my application. An extract from the design statement main points to support my application are typically the following. Windows to the front of the property have been designed with masonry mullions and surrounds in characters similar to Mill Park Cottage, sash and case design style windows taking reference from Mill House, and two adjacent and close by properties while maintaining the privacy of these adjoining properties. The story and a half design and the dormer windows and the roof treatment all take their influences from Mill House. The boundary treatments now have hedgerows addressing both the B725 and B7020. Furthermore, in light of concerns raised by some neighbours, the external terrace, which overlooked the field to the rear of the site, within the original scheme has now been removed. Together with this, the massing and the external materials being proposed are now in keeping with the existing village architecture, and I feel I have done everything possible during the redesign of my house, addressing previous objections while still providing a house that would be comfortable living in while bringing up my young family. I hope the committee can accept and understand the compromises and changes I have made to meet and address as many concerns as possible. and thanks for taking the time to listen to my request.
Thanks very much for that, Tracy. Members, we're now in session. Before we go to any questions or observations, Carla, can you put up the image that you offered to do so earlier on the pub, hotel, whatever it is? And can you confirm that the principle of the construction of a house on this site has been established? It's simply just a case of whether or no this particular design meets the standard we'd require. And then I see Councillor Dryburgh wants to speak. If you could do that, please, and answer that question, I'd be grateful, Carla.
Yeah, yes, Chair. Yes, of course I can. Yes. I think both myself and the council archaeologist and the council built heritage policy officer all agree that the principle of the erection of a dwelling house on that site is acceptable. However, given that it's in a conservation area and given the historical importance of the village and the surrounding area, it's important that the design is suitable. And I think that's the argument we were trying to make there, that it's not the principle that we were arguing specifically, although the proposal doesn't, the principle of the proposal isn't acceptable because of due to the design, the current design.
Thanks very much, Carla. And just confirm that everybody's seen the image that you offered, because I see it's in the chat function. And I don't know whether every member's got that or no. It's maybe not on the full screen, but while you try and resolve that for me, I'll come back and ask about that later on. I've got Councillor Dryburgh and then I've got Councillor Thompson. Archie, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. And having looked at the report and listened to the objectors, I have to agree with them on a lot of things. I don't agree with everything, of course, because, for instance, a view is not a planning, issue as far as we're concerned. I looked at the recommendation decisions and I look at the policies that are, contrary to this for this application, and I would suggest that we go with the recommendations, and I'm happy to move that, Chair.
Thanks very much, Archie. Councillor Thompson, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yep, having heard the representations and from reading the report, I'd be happy to second Councillor Dryburgh if he's moving that. I think having got the comfort that the principle of a dwelling house is not an issue here, but it's actually the specific design that we've got in front of us, I think I agree with the reasons for refusal, so we'd be happy to go with the recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Henry. Stephen?
Yeah, that was me, Chair. I think Henry's coming in next.
Oh, sorry. It's one of these days, Stephen. Henry, please.
Thanks, Chair. Chair, it's really a question for Carla with respect to the report. It's I'm trying to understand the planning history on page 22 at 1.5. I'm just trying to piece everything together here. I fully understand the comments that have came back from the senior planner and the what was the other, the archaeologist, sorry. But I really am curious as to this wording in 0.15. Okay, the previous application. So the sort of middle sentence, prior to this application being made, the applicant was informally advised by officers that a revised house design on the plot, and it's this bit here, as now proposed, would be supported by officers. Now, I've just picked up from Carla there that Carla, as the officer, obviously is recommending refusal. So I really want to understand where this comment comes from, if that's possible, please, Chair.
Thanks, Henry, and Carla will reply. The only thing I'll remind members is it's not an official support until all officers, built heritage, etc., have had an opportunity to examine the application set out. So it was informal advice, and I think members have to bear that in mind. But Carla, can you answer Henry, please?
Yes, of course I can. Yes. Thank you for your question, Councillor McClelland. I can understand why you would ask it. The reason the applicant was informally advised that the revised proposal would be supported. However, I would say that the design that was submitted wasn't the design that the applicant wasn't advised to submit that design specifically. We didn't design it or advise them that design would be acceptable. We did say that we would support it. However, pre-application advice is not a predetermination of an application, and that advice is provided without the benefit of consultation responses and also representations from neighbours and members of the public. It's solely based on the information we have available at that time. Now, when that advice was provided, that was without the benefit of a site visit. That was during lockdown when we weren't able to carry out site visits. So yes, they were informally given advice that we could support the proposal. However, that was without the benefit of all the consultation responses, representations from neighbours and members of the public, and also the benefit of a site visit. It was based on the information that we had available at that time.
And just confirm, Carla, the principle of construction this site is not an issue. It's simply the design that's been presented before you today, or before us today.
Yes, that's correct. The principle of the erection of a dwelling house on that site is not disputed. It's solely the design.
Right, and it's only at the stage when it's formally presented that we then formally notify the applicant what the plan officer's recommendation, and it's only a recommendation, I appreciate that might be. So I've got Ian Carruthers, Jim McCormick, and I think Ivor has had a hand up as well. So Ian Carruthers, please, and I have a motion amendment member, so I'll be looking for alternative motion unless it's simple for discussion purposes. Councillor Carruthers.
Thanks, Chair. So, no, thanks very much. So, Henry's actually picked up on one of the questions, which is around what the plan is to do. So, thanks for the clarity on that, Carla. But I'm looking so when I asked to look at that particular presentation, that screenshot earlier, any normal day of the week, I think that would be acceptable. But obviously, we've had feedback from a senior planning officer and an archaeologist that's saying actually because of the historical element of the church being a monument, the standing stone being a monument, and actually the listed buildings opposite, that's what's changing the siting or the design of this in particular. We feel it should be a slightly different design, but any other day of the week it would be, and 1.5 alludes to that, I would say. But ultimately, what Carla's mentioned there is that actually until they actually had a proper site visit and was able to see actually on the ground the potential impact, that's when maybe a fuller decision could have been made. I mean, and that's where I'm minded, Chair. I mean, I know Dalton, I know it fairly well. I know the pub directly opposite the Thai restaurant. It is a two-storey. Opposite the Standing Stone, it's very, very close proximity. The house, but one house away, which it's been designed on the back of it, as we were told earlier. I think, Chair, this merits a site visit, and I'll certainly move that. That we do have a site visit, just so we can, because the photographs I don't think gives it merit either, because we're looking through trees, shrubbery, very difficult to make out and understand what impact a house of that proposal, the size and scale, what impact will that have on the neighbouring properties, will it have on the junction, will it have on the monuments and the listed buildings opposite. So, Chair, I would certainly propose a site visit. I think in this case, like the planners, the stance they've taken, it'd be right for the committee to take that stance. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Ian. So you want a site visit to establish the nature of the setting that this new house would be in relation to the village, is that right?
It's the village, but I think the 4 points that in particular have been pointed out, and some have been pointed out by some local residents. So you have got the two monuments being the church and the Standing Stone, but you have got the listed buildings opposite. So there's a number of things there, and they're embedded within the reasons for refusal, Chair. And I like to come back to probably previous ones, but the ridge height, if it is higher, how much higher is it to Mill Park? So I just write in this because that's where it's been designed from. That's the type of things I'd be looking for, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So I've got Councillor Dryburgh saying he moves that we do not have a site visit on the basis of enough information before him. I presume that's what he's saying when he moves that we don't have a site visit. So I'm looking for a seconder for you, Ian, and then I'll ask Councillor Dryburgh just to make his statement for the record and then see if there's a supporter for him. So is there a mover to support Ian Carruthers' proposal for a site visit, please? Councillor Blake?
I'd be quite happy to support the site visit, thanks.
Henry McClellan, please.
Chair, hands down.
Thank you. So we have a move from Councillor Dryborough. Do you want to make your motion, please, or your amendment, Councillor Dryborough?
Thanks very much, Chair. I mean, we have had a couple of. Sorry, we have had a couple of planning applications from this particular place, and you know, photographs of right along that road. I think people in Annandale and Esty will know the area very, very well, and therefore I suggest we've got enough information today to not have a site visit and make a recommendation on the application as is.
Thank you, Councillor McKee.
Thanks, Chair. Could Clara put the site plan up again, please, showing the building as it filled the site?
Carla, can you do that, please? But remember, Councillor McKee, we're just looking to see whether or not a site visit's required. We don't want to debate at this stage.
No, we are due
support.
We are due respect, Chair. That's why I want to see that planning picture, because I believe that the site is such that it doesn't need a site visit. We can object on the size of the building as it's shown in that plan. Thank you.
Okay, Fiona, it'll be Fiona. Can you put up that site plan for Councillor McKee, please? Or the location plan, sorry. While we're waiting for Fiona to facilitate that, Councillor Hislop, please.
Chair, it's with regard to if we do go to a site visit, can we take into account looking at more than just the site? Because we went to one in Annan, and when we asked if we could look at other buildings compared to it, we were sort of told, no, you're just looking at the site. So if we do go on a site visit, will we be able to take into cognizance the sort of aspects from likes of the pub? If you're looking from the pub towards the site or from the site towards the pub to see how it's sit in, would we be allowed to do that when we're there?
I'll ask Carla to clarify that, but first of all, I've just been reminded that I inadvertently missed Councillor McCormick, and my apologies. Jim, can you come in, please?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to Carla for posting the slide of the pump. But it does say at 4.8 there are 3 buildings which are 2-storey high. Could Carla tell me where the other 2 are?
I'm sorry, I don't have access to my report because I have had technical difficulties with my computer this morning, and it's not letting me into our computer system. So I can't see the part of the report that you're referring to that says that there's 3 stories that are, there's 3 buildings that are 2-storey high. I don't think I wrote that. It might be, was that the response from the Council Built Heritage Policy Officer?
It's the Built Heritage Policy up here. I can't even say it right. The Built Heritage Policy Officer on page 22, and it's section D, and it goes on across to page 23, and it's at the top of page 23 and on the committee report that makes reference to a barn behind. In terms of height, there are 3 buildings in the main street which are 2-storey, excluding the church hall and the church, the remainder being single-storey. That's what the report says. So if you can't help, Councillor McComb will have to just deal with the situation we have, unless perhaps Tracy or Fiona could post the committee reports, page 22 and 23, for Councillor McComb to see. And it is procedural because it might be the difference, Stephen, between whether or no Councillor McComb supports or does not support a site visit. And I understand it's some lengthy discussion, but it's to make sure members have all the information before them to see whether or no they would like to support a site visit or are content with the information they have before them. And clearly Councillor McComb does not have the information before him that he wants to allow him to make an informed decision.
That is the case, Chair. Thank you.
You can actually see on Street View there is a two-storey property, red sandstone one, just as you come into Dalton from the southeast corner, and panning across. There's certainly a taller building, but I'm not sure it's actually two-storey at that point. It's probably down as the one next to Thistle Cottage. But I can't immediately going through Street View see 3 two-storey properties, I have to say.
Okay, that's it. Okay, so Councillor McComb, you've got as much information as you're about to get. So
thank you, Chair.
So we have a motion to have a site visit, and that's not been supported yet. I think it has been a motion to deal with the matter today. I think they've both been supported when I think about it. Can you just remind us, Tracy, where we are in terms of the request for a site visit from Councillor Carruthers and the proposal? We have enough information before us to determine today, presented by Councillor Dryborough.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, motion is proposed by Councillor Carruthers, seconded by Councillor Blake, to defer consideration of the application for a site visit to be arranged, and the amendment was by Councillor Dryborough, but I don't have a seconder for the amendment as yet.
I'll second that, Chair.
Councillor McKee spoke up, but John Martin put his hand up. So John Martin first. John, please.
Just to second that, Chair.
Thank you. Okay. So we now have a motion and an amendment. Tracy, can you take us through the procedure, please, and then carry out the vote?
Yes, thanks, Chair. So motion proposed by Councillor Carruthers, seconded by Councillor Blake, to defer consideration of the application for a site visit to be arranged, and the amendment proposed by Councillor Dryborough, seconded by Councillor Martin, to determine the application at the meeting today without a site visit. I'll proceed to the vote, Chair.
Thank you.
Chair.
Amendment.
Vice Chair.
Amendment.
Councillor Blake.
Motion.
Councillor Carruthers.
Motion.
Councillor Dryborough.
Amendment.
Councillor Drysdale.
Motion.
Councillor Fairbairn.
Motion.
Councillor Ferguson.
Declared an interest, Tracy.
Sorry, Councillor Ferguson.
I declared an interest and excuse myself from this
Okay.
item. I'm just listening.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Hislop.
Motion.
Councillor McClelland.
Motion.
Councillor McCobb. Councillor Martin.
Amendment.
Councillor Tate.
Motion.
Councillor Thompson.
Amendment.
Councillor Young.
Amendment.
Chair, that is 8 votes to the motion and 8 to the amendment. Would you like to use your casting vote?
Yes, Tracy. I'll go with the amendment. We'll determine this today. And apologies to Councillor Thompson. I see he did want to speak at some stage before we went to the vote, but he's subsequent withdrawn it. So apologies for that. So the matter will be determined today. Councillor Dryborough again, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. And I'll go with my original of motion is to go with the recommendation within the report as suggested by the officer.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that motion?
I'll second that, Chair.
Jane Maitland, and it's Stephen and then
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll second it. I mean, I think the procedural one was just once that was resolved, we would just go back to the original motion as was put forward by Councillor Driver and myself, but I was happy to second again.
Thank you. Jane Maitland, please.
Thank you, Chairman. That's actually what I was going to ask about. Chairman, I've looked at this and I've considered the report carefully. I think what we're looking at is a prominent site, and my view is that the officers have got this right in respect of this conservation area in Dalton. The principle is not in argument. I'm absolutely certain we'll have a dwelling at that corner, and we've got an opportunity, I think, to put something in that would enhance the conservation area. I'm afraid it's just a bit too big as it stands at the moment, and I look forward to getting something that will be sympathetic and attractive for that particular corner of the village. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks very much, Councillor Maitland. Are there Councillor Hislop?
Chair, I was wondering if there's anything we can actually do in refusing this to guide the applicant into what we would find acceptable, whether it's a single story or a smaller story and a half, because when you have an officer who rightfully can't give you an answer at the time because everything's not in, how do you know how to come through and actually design something to actually meet the criteria? We have a site that is developable, but what do we actually want to put on it? And can we put anything on now to actually give them an idea of what we want?
Thanks, Ivor. I'll ask Carla to respond, but obviously the reasons for refusal should guide the applicant in bringing back another application. And it's maybe also a gentle reminder to officers when they say that an application might be acceptable. The officers would always say subject to suitable representations being received from partner agencies or other departments in the council. So just maybe an unfortunate phraseology that our case officer used in this occasion to try and encourage the applicant to bring forward, because we are, after all, trying to help develop the region, but in a sympathetic way. So I'm sure Carla will be more than happy to speak to the applicant and offer some guidance on the basis of the reasons for refusal and how they might be overcome. But I'll ask Carla to respond to that before Councillor, I think Carruthers wanted to come back in. But Carla, can you help Councillor Hislop first, please?
Yes, of course I can. Yes, I can. I'd be happy to give the applicant further advice as to what would be acceptable, and perhaps it would be beneficial for them to have a meeting with myself and the Built Heritage Policy Officer and the Council Archaeologist. The issue is, I think, a lot of the time is we can't be prescriptive. We're neutral in that we shouldn't be in a position where we are designing the proposal. We always ask that applicants get professional advice in designing their in designing a dwelling house. Particularly such as this, which is in quite a sensitive position. But yes, I'd be happy to provide additional advice and help to the applicant, and I think it would be beneficial in this instance to have a meeting with them, with the Council Built Heritage Policy Officer and Council Archaeologist.
That's great, Carla. You took the words out of my mouth, because we cannot get ourselves into a situation where we design houses for people to make application to us. So thanks for that response. I see Councillor Hislop wants to come back in, and then Councillor Carruthers, and then hopefully we will move on unless of an alternative proposal. So Councillor Hislop to come back, and then Councillor Carruthers.
Chair, I think it's a very difficult thing for an applicant to do, because it's a subjective idea. It's not like whether it's in a line. You know, if it's outside the village boundary, then you have to argue it's outside and why it should be included. But if you're told that, you know, base it on the house 2 up from this one, you do it. Is it the height that's wrong? Is it actual massing, and that's the sort of thing maybe that we could advise. The massing's maybe too big, and if it was slightly smaller, it may actually go through. That's why I find it difficult in a subjective manner rather than an objective sort of discussion on this one.
That's great, Ivor. Thank you. Councillor Carruthers, then we'll move on.
Thanks, Chair. It was
unless in terms of proposal.
No, thank you, Chair. I think it's taken on board what's happened with the site visit. I am disappointed in regards to that. The planners felt it's necessary to have a site visit, and it obviously clarified then maybe that's what actually changed their mind at the time, because obviously Carla said it had been supported up to a point in time. Then there was a change in mind. So that's just taking that into consideration, Chair. It's the point that Ivor just picked up, and then that's what was going through my mind. So how does this applicant get to a conclusion? And so that's been outlined as well. But so I think from what I can see in the plan history, they've put in, had a shot, and they withdrew it after consultation. They've took on the consultation and then formally been right. Okay, that's good to go. They've went in another shot. But here now, it's after taking that advice, they've come back and it looks like it'll be refused, and on the back they'll come back and then I understand that there's no free go or anything like that after that. That's disappointing as well. I don't know if we've done it in the past or no, but I mean it's unfortunate if we're getting guided, taking down a particular route and thinking the planning authority is satisfied, then this changes their mind whether it's through consultation or otherwise. I think there should be some kind of leeway put there, Chair.
I think the leeway being offered, Ian, is that our planning officer says that she and the Built Heritage Officer will meet with this applicant to make sure that they're given the appropriate guidance to ensure that the next time their application comes in, it meets with what the council might be able to support in terms of a development on this site, because we don't now give free visits. We don't now meet with people to encourage them to develop their sites. It's up to them to bring forward to us proposals, but given the situation that has evolved or come to light in this instance, the planning officer has offered to convene a meeting with all parties that will hopefully resolve this to the satisfaction of the applicant and get us a development that's appropriate, fitting for the community or for the settlement, and I trust that will then probably be supported through a delegated authority unless other objections come in at the time a new application is submitted. It's the best we can do, Ian, and that's where we are. So thanks for the observations. Thanks, Carla, for the offer to meet with the applicant and ensure that they get appropriate guidance and support bringing a new development application forward. And unless I have an alternative a proposal brought forward today, we have a motion and a seconder to go with office recommendation. On the basis that there's no alternative view, Tracy, can you confirm the decision of the committee today, please?
Okay, Chair. Yes, members have agreed to refuse the application on the grounds as detailed in the report.
Thank you. Move on to agenda item number 5, members. An application for the erection of 2 dwelling houses, renewal of planning permission in principle, reference 18/0066/PIP at Pinehurst, Tongland, Kirkcudbright. Its full application, reference number 21/1600 PIP. The recommendation is to approve subject conditions, and David Sutty is deputising for Iona Brooke today. So David, if you can take us through this report, please.
Thank you, Chair. If we can move on to the first slide, please. So the application site is outlined in red in the centre there. It's accessed at the northern end of Tongland from a shared private access of the A711. And where you see there's a blue square there, that's the host dwelling house, Pinehurst. Next one, please. And this just is the actual application location plan. The blue line indicates land, which is also in the ownership of the applicant. Next one, please. Unusually, although this is a planning permission in principle, you have got a considerable amount of detail. So it's for 2 houses, which you can see located in the plot there, identical, houses, each with a detached garage. Next, please. Just shows the ground floor layout with the garage as well. And the next one will give you the first floor layout plan, 3-bedroom house. Elevations are up in the next 2 slides. So basically you've got natural slate, rendered walls. And there's a few photos which I've included here that were actually taken by the original case officer back on the 1st of February 2018. There'll be about 10 slides which the Community Council will be showing, which shows it as for more recent photos and also in the summer. This is the access road down to Pinehurst. You can see the railing along, so the application site is on your left-hand side, looking across the site, looking east there. And the next one shows some of the trees within the site. And again, and again. So I think the critical thing to stress with this one is that this is actually a renewal of an existing planning permission. Normally a planning permission in principle lasts for a period of 3 years, after which it expires if the approval of matters specified in condition hadn't been submitted. That would have taken it to the 22nd of May 2021, which is probably why the applicant has resubmitted. But due to coronavirus, the Scottish Government issued emergency legislation which renewed permissions that were going to expire, and they've actually reissued this on a number of occasions. So automatically, the planning permission principle runs to the 30th of September 2022. So it is still a live extant permission on this site. So really all that you can consider today is whether or not you are prepared to extend the life of that planning permission principle further, which would give it a further 3 years from, if it was to be approved today, then that would be a further 3 years beyond the time period which it currently has. Where you have a renewal application, it does not normally allow you to reconsider the principle unless there has been a material change in circumstance that is absolutely fundamental. So, for example, if the development plan had changed and the relevant policies now would lead you to conclude that permission shouldn't be granted any longer, that would be such a circumstance. But in most instances, you would have to bear in mind that you have a valid permission which is still capable of being implemented. So for those reasons, basically, it's, although the Community Council, that's the reason why it's before yourselves, the Community Council objection, although they have reservations about the conditions, the advice from officers here is that you cannot reasonably change the conditions which are attached to a live permission that you're just seeking here to extend its life. So happy to answer any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I have one before Councillor McKee comes in. I take it that, as is the case in normal circumstances, if the applicant starts to develop the site now or before September 2022, that then establishes absolutely the development and it doesn't change or it can't then be changed. There is an established procedure there that allows the development to go ahead. Is that right or is that wrong?
Because it is a planning permission principle, there still are what we call the matters specified by conditions, which are set out in your agenda papers that would be reattached. So they would need to submit further details to be able to actually start work, and they would need to have to do that before the expiry of the permission, be that the current one before the end of September or if it is renewed. After that, there's one suspensive condition about tree protection, which they would need to give further details on. At that point, they could then commence it, and that would secure the development indefinitely.
Thanks, David. Councillor McKee, please.
There's mention in the papers about damage they've done to public access, etc., etc. Can we get them to repair that damage before they go any further? It seems, just on reading the papers, it seems like they've just decided what they're going to do and they're damaging everything or doing whatever they want. and the public access in that area has been severely damaged. And my view would be is that before they start any construction work in the site, they should repair all the damage they've done. Is that possible?
I thought that related to a different site altogether, David, and that was mentioned in the papers as well. But David, can you help David McKee, please?
Chair, I would agree with your comments there. I think that's conflating two separate things. There was another application which was at the committee previously and was subject to a site visit. Really, all you're considering today is the renewal of an existing planning permission.
Councillor McKee, you want back in, or are you working with your hand to get it done, Joe?
No, well, I was working with my hand to get it down, but okay, David, that's fine. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Any other questions for our case officer? Thanks, members. In that case, I hope we have Donald Henry with us in Teams. Donald,
sorry, Chair, I'd written speak in the chat, but obviously too late. Can I come in briefly?
Oh, absolutely, John. Yes, come in. Aye.
I note that the roads officer recommends that trees be removed to allow. I'll just find the exact bit. It would be appropriate that the existing trees at the southwest corner of the site around the access be removed in order to allow maximum visibility. Could I ask David to comment on that recommendation?
Absolutely. David, please.
Thank you, Chair. That wasn't a recommendation that I understand was applied to the original application, and it's out with the red line boundaries. So I did have a look at that, but I don't consider it's really appropriate to be adding additional conditions. It's almost like having a second bite at the cherry, if you see what I mean.
Okay, well, we'll probably deal with that again when we're in session, if that's all right with you, John. Although, again, we'd be wise to take officers' advice. But we'll come back to you. I'll remember to come back to you and ask you that, John, when we're in session. If it's case officer questions, Pauline, please. If no, we've got a representative to come in.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair, for letting me in. Could I just ask David, could you confirm, David, with regards to the roads, we have been reading quite a few reports and we're all quite aware as to what's happening in Tungland at the moment. Would there not be a material consideration in the change of the roads with regards to the extra activity at the quarry and also the extra activity on that stretch before the turn-off that's proposed into this particular development at Pinehurst? To me, there looks to be a difference in a material consideration here, but please, could you advise me if I'm incorrect with this? Thank you, David. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Pauline. I think David's absolute with this site. It'll not be relevant in this case, but David?
Again, you probably have to focus really on the fact this is an existing extant permission for two houses. If there is a separate concern about the volume of traffic that is going through Tungland, obviously this is within the 40-mile-an-hour area. You don't have an objection from the roads officer if there are concerns about whether or not a speed limit should be changed under a traffic regulation order. Then that's really a separate matter which should be addressed to the roads team to try and take that forward. But I don't think you could reasonably, given that you've got no objection from roads officers to this renewal, whether it would be appropriate not to actually refuse this application on those grounds.
Thank you.
David. Thanks, Pauline. Okay, if we have no other questions for our case officer, hopefully Donald Henry's with us. Donald's chair, I think, of Tungland Community Council. Donald, are you with us in Teams?
Yes, I am here. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. You'll remember, I think we've had you with us before. You'll remember it's a 3-minute presentation. I'll ask you to draw your presentation to conclusion 30 minutes beforehand. And if you'd be kind enough to wait in case members have questions for you, I'd much appreciate it. Just whenever you're ready, Donald. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before you start the clock, I would be grateful if you'd let me correct a minor mistake by Mr. Sutty. He referred to the host dwelling being also the applicant for the field. That's actually not the case. The field was bought a few years ago by the former owner of the host dwelling, what he referred to as the host dwelling, to increase his garden ground, and he sold the Pinehurst, which he referred to as the host. So the field is only owned by a Mr. Estall, who's no longer resident.
Okay.
Just wanted to clear that up because Mr. Sutty's statement slightly confused me there. But we can begin with the first slide, please. I'll start when that appears.
Thanks, Donna. So your time will start now, and I'll remain you with 30 seconds to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Huge environmental change has taken place since permission was first granted, hence we must impose far stronger conditions. Over 30% of our survey forms were returned confirming genuine consternation. They indicate unanimous insistence on a 30-mile-an-hour limit to be imposed and full support for boundary conditions to protect trees and the last fragment of our historic path. Roads didn't pick up on the field, which is visited daily for feeding horses. The access is regularly blocked across when transferring animals, creating a tailback hazard on the bend from cars turning across double white lines from the south. Run through all the tree pictures, please. Oh, where was the first picture? I didn't see the one of the road. We'll have to... I was assured by Iona that the first picture was going to be one of a lorry in the middle of the road. I'm sorry, we're eating into the 3 minutes here. It is important that we have that first picture of the lorry.
Chair, I can apologise if there's another photo, but I've only had the 10 photos which are in the presentation.
I'm sorry, this is not acceptable. I did get an assurance from Iona copying Robert Duncan, saying that the photograph of the road entering the site was going to be included. And that is absolutely central to our concerns about the need for the 30-mile-an-hour limit. I'm sorry, Chair, you may wish to suspend the clock from ticking just now until we can find that photograph. I will continue. If Robert Duncan could possibly find that photograph, what I'll do is I'll continue with the discussion from the tree pictures. Is that acceptable? While Robert finds the picture.
Chair, Robert's not meeting today, and I'm afraid Iona's on leave. I do not have that photo, so I'm very sorry, but I cannot share it. I don't have it.
John, it looks like
I'm sorry. I've been given an assurance that it was to be included.
Donald, can you just give me a minute then?
Okay.
Members, and I'll ask if there are any objections. The applicant or the objector anyway claims that this is vital, this image that we don't have. Are members willing to defer this consideration to the next meeting on the basis that the presentation that the objector was guaranteed would be here is not, or the images anyway, or are members content to continue with consideration based on the fact that we deal primarily with the officer's representation or presentation and the officer's observations, and the representatives simply have an opportunity to present a case to us. So I've got Councillor Dryborough and then Councillor Drysdale. Archie?
Thanks very much, Chair. I think the issue here is whether members have enough information to get to the end of the matter. This is a previous application that has been suggested by Mr. Sutty, and to change any recommendation would require a lot more detail and things like that. I think that we need to go forward with this as a planning applications committee.
Thanks, Archie. Before we go any further, Tracy has presented a suggestion. If Mr. Henry can email Tracy the picture that he will have to hand, we could adjourn for 5 minutes to allow Tracy to upload that onto our screens. Mr. Henry, do you have the picture? Can you forward that to Tracy?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just trying to locate it just now. Tracy Solco, and I've copied David Sutty at the same time. And the images there. I'm happy to continue or adjourn as you wish.
Well, the suggestion is that we continue because it's a renewal of an existing application. It's difficult, according to the case officer, to change recommendations already there in any case unless there's material change. Just give me 1 second and I'll bring Pauline Drysdale in, then I'll speak to Tracy again and then we'll proceed unless there's definite reasons why not. Oh, Pauline has said that's the suggestion she was going to make. So what we're going to do, Mr. Henry, we're going to adjourn for 5 minutes. In my computer clock, it says 11:50. We will resume at 11:55 and hopefully in these 5 minutes.
Sorry, Chair. I have the picture now, so if Mr. Henry wants to go through the slides that are on screen just now, I can then bring the last one up when he's finished if you want to just proceed. I've got it now.
That'll be perfect. So, Mr. Henry, we have the picture. We will have it posted on screen at the end of your presentation. So, to save any confusion, can you just simply start again, please? And you have 3 minutes.
All right. Thank you very much to everyone. Yes, again, huge environmental change has taken place since permission was first granted. Hence, we must impose far stronger conditions. Over 30% of our survey forms were returned, confirming genuine consternation. They indicate unanimous insistence on a 30-mile-an-hour limit to be imposed and full support for boundary conditions to protect trees and the last fragment of our historic path. Roads didn't pick up on the field, which is visited daily for feeding horses. The access is regularly blocked when transferring animals, creating a tailback hazard on the bend from cars turning across double white lines from the south. Run through these tree pictures, please. There is great variety among mature examples which support red squirrels and diverse wildlife. The response is called for study of the copper birch and larches, so we want a full professional inventory by species and demand their replacement. Whatever happened to the legal requirement for an environmental assessment, for example? The final image of the hedge shows the historic path, that's it there, which abuts the site on the left. This particular section is referred to in the previous Pinehurst application when the archaeologist was so aggrieved by the loss of the path's identity, warning about, I quote, modern drive to new developments. And this is an absolutely pertinent concern. Roads recommends the removal of trees at the access corner on a private roadway, which hasn't been adopted by the council. Is that even allowed? The poor layout will delete the remaining path fragment, already destroyed further south. The internal drive running parallel to access to house number 2 is what causes the conflict with the historic path. We need conditions to protect the ancient hawthorn hedge and low stone dike that's covered in moss. We don't want more of that hideous concrete slab and posts that's now edging the fish house, so please insist on conditions to protect our heritage with smaller dwellings in the site. This treasured and atmospheric feature is not simply aesthetics, it has national significance. Having completed his pilgrimage on foot to Whithorn, James IV returned via Tungland Abbey, where he played cards with the flying monk Damien. The path was the old road north from the Abbey via standing stones at the Park of Tungland and was walked by the king on his way back to Edinburgh. This final remnant that you are looking at deserves urgent protection now. If attention can't be given to a little piece of natural wilderness, the climate emergency declaration might as well join the ranks of Bolsonaro. And that's about as much as I have to say on the matter. And if we can go to the last picture of the lorry, I think it will illustrate the access issue about the need for the 30-mile-an-hour limit. If Tracy can put that up. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Henry. Thanks very much indeed.
Fiona, could you just stop sharing?
Yep, that's me.
Thank you for putting that up, Tracy. At the back of the lorry, you can just make out the the end of the 40 mile an hour speed limit. So that's the entrance on the right into the proposed dwellings. That's one of the gates to the field where horse boxes are drawn across. And like I say, coming from the south, the opposite direction from the lorry, that's where you would see tailbacks being created on a bend behind the camera.
Thank you, Donald, and thanks very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
If you just wait a minute, please, in case any members have any questions for you, I'd be grateful. Members, any questions for Mr. Henry? David McKee.
Could we go to that? What was that picture with the gate on it? What was that? Is that this edge of the site, or what does that? What does that entail? That exactly that one. Where does that go?
That is the corner of the site where Rhodes is recommending removal of trees. That shows the corner of the hawthorn hedge, which is part of the ancient path. All that would be obliterated by the entrance into the site. The path itself isn't part of the development site, but the left-hand side of that hedge there is the hawthorn hedge. Incidentally, don't know if you heard on the news today, there's a hawthorn down at Kipford that's being crowned UK Tree of the Year. And I think, we're in the same category. We've got a very historic piece of woodland here. And it's a hawthorn. It even appeared on Radio 4 News this morning. So Dumfries and Galloway is becoming important. And I think it's worth considering that wee gate on the left there. It can actually be adopted by somebody else to be used locally. Mr. McKee there asked about the gate. It'd be dating from the days of the first power scheme that went in, and obviously that's going to have to be widened and removed for access into the site.
Thanks, Mr. Henry. Is that a legacy hand, Councillor McKee, or is that somebody else?
It's just a pity to hear that this has to be done away with. Thanks very much, though, for your answer.
Thanks, Councillor McKee. Any other questions for Mr. Henry? Councillor McKee seems to have been bothered getting his hand up and down, but I take it that that's a legacy one, so there doesn't appear to be any other member looking to question Mr. Henry. Thanks very much, Mr. Henry, for being with us today, and thanks for your presentation.
And thank you for resolving the technical difficulty with the image. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, we're now in session. If there, Councillor Dryborough, please.
I think I'm having the same difficulties as Jock McKee, slow hands and slow. Chair, I think that, I think Mr. Sutty outlined this earlier on. It'd be difficult to change anything in this as a recommendation. So I would say we go with the recommendations, Chair.
Thanks, actually. We've got Councillor Young's question earlier to resolve before we make a final determination, but I'm happy to have your proposal on the table at the moment. I've now got Jane Maitland, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Well, I'm just really saying at this point that I think it's rather sad, but I think we're stuck with this, and I do appreciate the incremental changes to the historical context of Tangland, which the Community Council is expressing, and I absolutely understand that. But equally well, this is a regulatory matter, and we have been advised very clearly that if there are no specific changes, nothing of substance that has happened, no policy change and nothing else in the interim, I don't think we've got any other option other than to accept the situation as it stands. But I think it's always useful to hear what communities feel about their environments and the context in which planning takes place. So thank you very much indeed, Chairman.
Thanks very much, Jane. I've Councillor. Actually, I'll ask Councillor Young to wait until the very end in case Pauline Drysdale has something else we might have to consider, then I'll bring John Young in at the end. So I'm skipping the queue. Pauline, please.
Thanks, Chair. Could I ask that John Young goes before me, please, Chair, because he was more involved with the archaeological history and it could be something to do with that. You know, it's important that we listen to Councillor Young first, if that's possible, but maybe I don't have the authority to do that. Thanks, Chair.
No, absolutely. I'm just trying to make sure that everybody had a chance to speak so that John could sum up at the very end. But John, come in, please.
Thank you, Councillor Drysdale. I appreciate that. And thank you, Chair. No, I think Donald Hendry has given a very good outline of the historic nature of Tongland, and I'm not going to dwell on that. I'm concerned about the tree stand. Apparently, to stop this being extended, we have to find a material reason for our intervention. And I'm just wondering if climate change, if they're going to, if we're going to lose trees, we're going to increase carbon dioxide emissions. And I'm citing climate change as a material change in determining this planning application.
Thanks, John. I think significant was the word that David used, and I don't know whether localised issues might be relevant, but I'll ask David to come in because I see that Stephen Thompson wants to speak, and Pauline, of course, is still to come back. So on the matter of climate change, David, is that a material consideration given that this permission exists as it is? David, please.
Hi, Chair. Climate change is obviously a material consideration, as members will be aware, but as has also been alluded to by Councillor Driver before, that this is actually primarily a procedural issue, that you have a live permission, and you may be unhappy with the decision that was taken in 2018, but unfortunately that decision was made. This is really a case of just extending this one. So my view, and it might be worth getting Laura's view on this, is that the climate change emergency wouldn't really be so materially affected by the level of tree felling within the site.
Well, that was my thought, but I'm happy to have Laura come in. And of course, the other thing is, if we refuse to the extension, the applicant can still carry out the exact procedures that were agreed in 2018. But if Laura is available, can you just offer some advice on climate change and whether or no it's material enough in this case to allow members to change the recommendation? You're muted, Laura.
Sorry, Chair, I think I've got the same problem as everybody else. Things are going quite slowly on my system this morning. I would agree with David that given the quantities that we're dealing with, climate change, although a material consideration, would not be so significant as to alter the previous conditions attached.
Thanks for that, Laura. Okay, so we'll come back to that at the end. I've now got Pauline and then Stephen Thompson, please.
Thanks very much, Chair, for letting me in. I probably have a question for Laura, if that's acceptable, Chair.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I listened to the last meeting but didn't take part with regards to a similar area. And I believe there was some confusion, was there not, with regards to the ownership of the land. Could we have clarification that the person that's applying here, the applicant, has absolutely full ownership of this land, and therefore we cannot at this stage impose additional conditions with regards to an environmental assessment, the retainment of the hedge, the low stone dike, the path and the gate. We have no control over that, I am assuming, Laura, if the land is in ownership of the applicant. And that's 100%. Thanks.
Thanks, Pauline. I think Laura will tell you that's a civil matter. The people that submit an application have to give us an assurance that they own the land, but if we are misled, that becomes a legal matter. Laura?
Yes, that's correct. When the application goes in, as David will be able to confirm, there's a certificate where the applicant confirms their ownership of the area of the ground. The council can apply conditions to the area where the applicant owns. There is a particular way that you can apply conditions to areas that are out with the applicant's control, which we have done in other cases. But if there are areas out with the applicant's control, then we would not normally attach conditions there. Does that answer the question?
Pauline?
Thank you, Chair, for letting me back in, and thank you, Laura, for your answer. It semi-answers the question, but I still think there's a bit of dubiousness here. So could I just have absolute clarity, probably from the Chair this time and from Mr. Sutty, if possible? Can you just confirm that we cannot, at this stage, impose additional conditions to protect this historical right of way? Thank you, Chair.
I will leave that exactly or fully in Mr. David Sutty's lap. I'm absolutely sure his advice is that we cannot change what's already in place, and that exists until 2022. In any case, September 2022, and we can only change if we have a reason to believe there's a material change in legislation. But David, can you formally tell Pauline what we can and cannot do, please?
Chair, if the land was shown within the red line or the blue line, then it is competent to attach conditions to it if you're looking at it from as a brand new permission. So if this permission had expired and you were back at square one and everything was being considered afresh, or de novo to use the legal term, then yes, that would be correct. You could go and attach whatever conditions the committee felt were appropriate at that time. My advice here is that this is a renewal of an existing permission. Noting what Mr. Henry had said, and he will know the local circumstance, what I was going on was the basis that we have a blue hatched line on the location plan, which was submitted with this application, which shows it to be in the ownership. If that is incorrect or has moved on, then obviously the application's been in for some time. I apologise, but that was the reason for my advice about it being in the same ownership. But certainly at this stage with this renewal application, my view is that no, you shouldn't be attaching new conditions to this permission unless there are very, very strong reasons for doing so.
And David, just to clarify as well, in normal circumstances, land ownership, we are given an assurance that the application or the applicant has ownership of the ground the application is made for, and it's a civil matter as to specific land ownership, and that's not the case, although the applicant can be challenged in court by misleading or providing false information to the council. Is that right?
Chair, it's part of the application form, and I'm just looking at it now, and it confirms that Mr. James Estelle was the owner of all the land which formed part of the application site. So that form is online, and we have to treat that in good faith.
Fine. Okay. So hopefully that sorts Pauline. Stephen Thompson, please.
Thanks, Chair. I think it's on the back of Councillor Young's comment, I think, and it's really just to do with this committee's response to previous applications or consultation responses for the likes of pylons or whatever, where we did, I suppose it's how much is enough in terms of material difference, because we have adopted a new priority for the council, which specifically mentions protection and development of biodiversity in light of the climate emergency policy, if you like. So that is a material change in terms of this council's policies within the period since this was originally agreed. But then it's a case of how much is enough to warrant enough to make a difference to this actual application. So I think that's what's sort of floating around in my mind. But clearly it's more of a comment than a question, but I would suggest that you could say there has been a change, but it's whether or not it's enough, and that's really up to members, I guess. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stephen. I think David Sutty was quite clear that it is a material consideration, but in his opinion, the application before us is not significant enough to encourage the committee or invite the committee to change the recommendation before us. Councillor Dryborough?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. Again, this application is a renewal of planning permission in principle, and if there have been any changes in any procedures or regulations and things like that, as David had mentioned before, it will be down to officers to ensure conditions of that moving forward are actually met.
Okay. So it had a very, oh, sorry, David, you want to come back in?
I was going to say, if it assists members, page 42, condition 6, you will note that there is a condition there regarding potential tree works. So there is an element there of wanting to ensure with these existing conditions the trees that are going to be retained. So it's not seeking a clear felling of the site. And that was made very clear at the time of the application as well. So that condition is really to ensure that the minimum amount of tree loss takes place, only sufficient to actually enable the houses to be developed.
Thanks, David. In that case, I intend to move forward, and unless anyone is otherwise minded, we will go with the officer's recommendation and approve this application as set out in the paper.
Agreed.
Thank you. Just confirm the decision of the committee, Tracy, please.
Thanks, Chair. Members have agreed to approve the application subject to the conditions detailed in the report.
Thank you. Move on to agenda item number 6, an application for the erection of 35 supported housing units, staff-based building, formation of access roads, car parking and other hard standing and hard and soft landscaping works, phase 1B, at Mutt Home Farm site, Langham. The application type is full application. Reference number is 21/1215/full. The application recommendation is approved subject to conditions, and case officer is Chris McTeer. See, Chris is with us. Will you just take us through your presentation, Chris, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon, members. The application is in front of members this afternoon as it constitutes a major development under the hierarchy of development regulations 2009. If we could just go to the first slide, please. So members will see here that the application site is located to the south of Langham, beyond the River Esk. And it is in LDP2. It's been allocated in LDP2 as an allocated housing site. Its designation is LHMH4, and the plan allocates approximately 200 units to the site up to 2029. If we can go to the next slide, please. So that's just an outline of the full allocated housing site there. I'll give members just a little bit of background to this site. The LDP2 site guidance requires a master plan for the site. Now, my own involvement with this particular site in Langham goes back to 2019, where I was the officer involved with pre-application inquiry regarding this site, and that sort of fed into what eventually became the master plan for the site. So there was a considerable amount of work went into that. So we had things like a flood risk assessment, contaminated land surveys, ecology surveys, and drainage impact assessment, just amongst other things that we looked at. So those particular reports were consulted on by some of the council's own internal people with regards to things like flooding, archaeology, contaminated land, but we also consulted with external agencies, SEPA, Transport Scotland, Historic Environment Scotland. So everything fed into a master plan which was agreed for the site and was adopted as supplementary guidance at the Council's Economy and Resources Committee in June of this year. If we could move on to the next slide, please. I just wanted to quickly show the phasing plan for the site. As the Chair mentioned, and is in the development description, we're looking at phase 1B. So phase 1B, you can see from the plan there, is sort of centrally located. It's the sort of the lighter blue colour, I think. Phase 1A has already been dealt with. So you can see at the very bottom of the site, the very south, that concerned the site access from the A7 just to the western end of Skipper's Bridge. So that was dealt with as a delegated application earlier on this year. So the approval is in place for that one. Also, as part of phase 1B, you'll see maybe just to the north of the sort of very end of phase 1B, as part of the phasing plan, they require a footbridge to link up Langham with the site, and there is a separate application in for that one that you'll see in the committee. My committee report section 1.7, I think, contains the planning history for the site. So that footbridge application is currently undetermined at the moment, but we've just not long finished discussions between ourselves, my colleagues in Roads and Transport Scotland. So that is pretty much ready to go as well. But that'll be a delegated decision for that one. So if we can move on to the next slide. This should show the site layout for the sort of the southern half of the site. So that includes phases 2 and 3 with this one. So it's a little busy, the picture, but what we're looking at today is the main spine road that runs in from the south. And sort of sections in yellow that you can see are sort of landscaping works, and what we are looking at is the piece of land to the east of the spine road, but to the west of the sort of the green belt of planting that you can see there. Next slide, please. We'll show a slightly more cut down version of the actual physical development that we're looking at on the site today. So it's mainly focused around this sort of central courtyard with a couple of other blocks of development out to the north and the south of that one. The application is for 35 supported living units rather than sort of traditional dwelling houses, which we'll likely see through further phases of the development as it goes forward. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so I'll just, I've got some photographs of the site. As you can see, they weren't taken yesterday. This was earlier on in the summer on a particularly nice day. So we're looking at the site from the south. So as you can see, it's a fairly level site, although it is elevated from the River Esk, which is beyond the trees that you can see just to the right of the picture. In the distance, you can see Murton Farmhouse, and to the left of that, just round about the pylons, you can see a sort of cluster of agricultural buildings as well that form part of the sort of the wider farm unit there. Next slide. So this is the site from the west. Strictly speaking, this part of the site is the third phase of development, but I wanted to include all sort of aspects of this. But you can see that it's a fairly flat site. And there's a lot of sort of mature hedgerows and trees that form the boundary of this particular site, so it keeps it sort of fairly well contained. Next slide, thank you. So that's a view from the south. That's looking with Skipper's Bridge behind the photographer, looking towards Murton Farm, and you can just see the access into the farm just to the right hand side of the picture there. Next slide. That's just looking back down the road towards the access, which will be along that sort of hedgerow just beyond the sheep that you can see there. Next slide. Again, this is just the site from the east, so this is looking from the existing Murton access out across the site. Next slide. That's just again looking from the east up towards the farmhouse, and the next slide should be right up next to the farmhouse. So that kind of gives you an idea of where what the site looks like. So next slide. Oh, one last one of the site. If we could just move on to the next one, please. So I've included some block details of this. I haven't included the sort of the finalised detail of every single block that's in the development. Take all day, but I wanted to give a flavour of what is proposed on the site. So you can see there the blocks are mainly single story, 1 and 2 bedroom units. Within this, the finishes are modern, so we're looking at things like smooth render, cement slate style roof tiles, and aluminium triple glazing on the windows. If we can just move on to the next slide, I wanted to include this one. So if we look in the centre of the slide there, we've sort of got the gable end views, if you will, of this particular block. Now you can see just to the right and left of each one of these, we've got a flat roofed area. Now, generally, we wouldn't look at sort of flat roofs as being a great design feature, but in this case, they're to support a green roof, which it would contain grass and natural planting and things, and that's a really good feature that we would welcome in the sort of the wider development here. Next slide is again just another bit of block detail there. So you can see in this particular one, there's a link corridor between both bits of accommodation there. There is also, as part of the courtyard arrangement, the southern part of that contains a sort of communal and staff area as well, which has things like dining rooms, meeting rooms, offices, treatment rooms, that type of thing to support the residents of this particular development. Next slide. And again, next slide, we should be on to landscaping now. So there's quite a detail of landscaping scheme going into this one, obviously because it's a fairly wide open site. So we need to focus on plenty of landscaping here. So it mostly focuses on, as you can see in this part, street trees. We're also looking at small spaces with dedicated planting in them. And you can see there the additional trees to the eastern boundary, and it's also to retain existing trees and hedgerows within the site as well. There is a condition attached to that one where we're looking at that. And the next slide, which is my last one, this is a larger area of open space. Now, this is intended to be a sort of central area of open space for the wider development, but it is included in this particular phase. So you can see, well, if we could zoom in, but I've just kind of given us an overview of that. So there's quite a lot of planting, there's path networks, there's play equipment and things going in there, and the footbridge is located just to the north of this particular slide. You can see it just going across the River Esk there. So that's my final slide. If we can move on to just the end slide there. For the reasons set out in the committee papers, we are recommending this for approval, subject to conditions. And as ever, I'm happy to answer any questions that members might have about this particular application.
Thanks very much, Chris. Questions for case officers, Councillor McKee.
Given it's supported housing, Chris, are you looking at solar panels on the roof for these houses for electricity and heating?
Yeah, I was wondering if this would come up. There was a bit of commentary in that. It's you'll be aware, and I kind of sort of go back to the development I had at committee a couple of months ago at Southfield in Wigton as well. So we have adopted supplementary guidance on the reduction of carbon emissions in new buildings. Obviously, this application came in before we adopted that particular guidance, and it is something that building standards will pick up on just now. Obviously, with the new guidance, we're trying to kind of preempt what would come in the building warrant. It could be that solar panels, would be a requirement that might come as part of the building process. I had a look at the plans. There aren't any solar panels shown on that, but that's not to say that they might not come in as a non-material variation in the future if it was a requirement that building standards would look for. But there's nothing specific on that just now, if that helps.
Chris,
sorry, Chair. That's helpful, Chris. It's just I don't know what benefit solar panels are, or whether they're a liability. But given it's a supported accommodation, it might be an idea to get that sort of thing when you're building the houses. Put that sort of thing in if it's acceptable.
It is the sort of thing that the supplementary guidance that we have. It's to do with policy OP1 Part F, and it is to reduce the amount of carbon that goes into new buildings. So the solar panels do go away towards that. Some of the things that we've looked at, I did mention all the windows are triple glazed metal units. So these things will be picked up in the building warrant process, but it is something that we're looking to try and capture going forward is this particular supplementary guidance. But yeah, it'll be something that building standards will pick up on through their own regulations.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chair.
I'd imagine if members want to condition it, that would also be something that we'd have to instruct officers to do. I've got John Young and then Ronnie Tate, please.
Thanks, Chair, and excuse my question because I know it's not part of this actual planning application. You talked about the footbridge, Chris. Is it also a cycle bridge?
Yes, it is. That's one. Yes, it's for pedestrians. It's for cyclists, horse riders potentially. If there's a great common riding over in Langham as well. So who knows? Yeah, but yeah, it's for everything except vehicles.
Thanks, John. Ronnie Tate, please.
Thanks, Chair. It's just in the condition number 2, actually, on vehicle charging points. Would these be freestanding, Chris, in the site area on phase 1B?
Chris?
Yeah, I imagine they would be. I mean, it's something that we added in as members will be aware. We normally put in a requirement for ducting for electric charging points. Obviously, that's mainly to do with parking spaces that are within curtilages of dwelling houses. Obviously, the parking is remote from the building, so there is some requirement, but we have kind of left it sort of open-ended. To come to an agreement with the developer and bringing these forward. But I imagine that they will be freestanding units like you would typically see in a car park. But it's something that we'll take the sort of the detail of that further down the line, and we might see the ducting in some of the other phases of development where we're looking at more sort of traditional sort of dwelling housing as opposed to this particular housing that we're looking at.
Can I ask another question, Chairman, please?
Absolutely, Ronnie.
Yeah, it's just, I presume on this site, with the sewage being across the river, there'll be, I presume, a wastewater pumping station on this site at some stage. Where exactly is that going to be on the site?
Chris?
Off the top of my head, it's I'm pretty sure it's to the south of the site. It's near the access where it comes in off the A7. It's something that I could look into in a bit more detail and get back to you out with the committee if that helps. But there is I'm pretty sure it's down in the south of the site.
You will be able to confirm there's a pumping station in place somewhere, though.
Yeah, can do that, yeah.
Thank you.
Happy with that, Ronnie? I presume Ronnie doesn't want to come back in. He's taking his hand down and he's muted. So, Pauline, please. Pauline Drysdale.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much for the report, Chris. Just as a point to note, page 56 on the conditions, point number 4 is probably a bit of a daft question, but with regards to the new sites that have been built, which is great, 35, we don't obviously have an understanding, but there are for people, who have perhaps difficulties, and there could be children involved, obviously you're building a park, but with regards to it reads here, the boundary enclosures will be formed in complete accordance with such a scheme. Could you just clarify for me, Chris, does that mean that the boundary is enclosed and it's safe, obviously bearing in mind that we're quite close to the river here, or is that something that comes at a later date? It's just to find out for my interest more than anything else. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Chris? Sorry, jumped the gun there. The site is beyond the river, so you have the river, and then there's a sort of an area of trees, and then there's the Merton Farm access, and then there's a sort of an enclosure there. So when we're talking about enclosures, we're talking mainly to do with enclosures round about the dwelling houses or round about the units in this case. So if there are any fences and enclosures there, it's those ones in particular that we're looking at to capture with that condition.
Thanks, Pauline. Jane Maitland, please.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm a bit disappointed we haven't got the applicant here to ask them about the design, because this is really important. You know, it's places for 35 people. It's dementia specific extra care housing, and a lot of emphasis is placed upon the circadian rhythms of people and people being able to see sunlight, and the design and access statement makes that quite clear. That's really important. But what slightly concerns me is that although the orientation of the buildings is designed that there will be some sunlight into them, the internal arrangements are not nearly as happy making. You know, quite often the living rooms are not orientated towards that sunlight. You get the showers and kitchen and storage areas orientated, particularly Block F and Block E are designed like that. It seems to me to be quite unfortunate that we haven't got an opportunity of questioning the architect as to why this was done. There might be a perfectly good reason, but it's not clear to me. And Chris, I wanted to ask you about the blocks. I think it's A. There's a very large expanse of flat roof on Block A, which runs east-west, so sort of faces north-south. And the large expanse to the north of it, I am not clear how that block gets any sunlight. And it faces north, and it's not obvious to me, how exactly that is going to be lit. Because, I mean, the last thing we need are depressing spaces. And as I say, I wish I'd been able to ask the architects, because it's not clear to me just exactly how they have maximised the natural daylight with these buildings. And I'm very concerned about that, because I think they really have a great impact, particularly on vulnerable people who will live very largely in these places. They won't probably move around a tremendous amount. So could you help me with that? I've got a second question about the green roofs. I wonder if Langham has a problem with seagulls. I do hope not. And I hope that there is access to be able to get to deal with the green roofs. But I'm most concerned actually about the internal design and the way that they are orientated and used. So I wonder if you could help me with that, please.
Thanks, Jane. Chris?
I suppose looking at what I can answer, and obviously I can't speak for the architects in this case, but certainly with regard to Block A, if I've actually got I've got the plan open up in front of me just now, so that you're absolutely correct. That's a sort of northern orientation, particularly the flat roof part at the back. But looking at the plan, that's a plant room, a kitchen, some offices. So this was part of the sort of the non-living part of this application. So this is the sort of the staff areas, meeting rooms, reception area, and things. Although the southern part of Block A, so the bit that's closest to the site entrance, there are 4 units there. But they will have, given the way that the sun goes in their orientation, that will be, there will be a certain amount of daylight will filter through into those. But the northern ones are non-habitable, so that probably goes some way to as to why they're arranged that in that particular way. Again, as far as the internal arrangements go for some of those, obviously we don't have a massive amount of control over the sort of the internal spaces. It's probably more a matter for building standards and or the architect that drew the plans up. I'm not trying to sidestep the issue there, but yeah, it's and I hope that Langham doesn't have a problem with seagulls, but I don't know if that's an issue for them or not with the green roofs.
Thank you, Chairman, for that. That's helpful. I will say that the Block A actually faces south, and what they're going to look at is a row of cars. As I say, I wish we'd had the chance to speak to the architect. It would have been helpful. But thank you for that.
Thanks for that, Jane.
For the explanation about Block A, because there wasn't a floor plan on these for Block A. But thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Councillor McComb. Jim.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks for the report, Chris. Chris, in your verbal description of the site, what I took from it was this is an elevated river terrace. Would that be correct?
Chris?
I suppose you could say that, yes. It is. It sits higher up than the River Esk, yes. So it is elevated from that. Something that you can see from the and I think it was my second slide, which showed the sort of the overall allocation of the site. It was coloured. There was a sort of big chunk missing. What you would say would be the sort of the natural site. It's sitting in white, so you can see it there. The area of white was taken out as it's potentially at risk from flooding. So, but yeah, the remainder of the site, particularly south of that sort of part, is elevated from the river. Yeah.
So the flood risk management team, they seem quite satisfied with the site selection.
Yes, it's we had a flood risk assessment, as I mentioned at my sort of my beginning remarks about the master plan. There was a flood risk assessment done for the site. Our own flood risk management team and SEPA were both consulted on that, and obviously there was changes made to get to the point that we're at just now. So yeah, they're content with that.
Right. The one other question relating to this, is there a very steep drop down to the river?
From what I remember from a site visit with the footbridge, there is, but bearing in mind that the sort of the river itself is beyond. I think I mentioned it earlier on, where you saw the access road. It's beyond that. So yeah, there is a drop down to the river, but it's out with the red line boundary, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, I was just wondering what safeguards there would be, to protect residents from going down this steep drop.
If it's with the application site, it'll be the landowner, whoever the landowner might be, that will be responsible, I would have thought. But Chris?
Yeah, I would echo that. I'm trying to remember if there is a fence along that particular site. If you maybe, Fiona, if you could sort of go through to the photographs, it might actually give us an idea of what's down there. It's as you can tell from the sunny pictures, it's been a while since I was there. So next one I think is probably the one to look at. So it's difficult to say. I'm not sure. You can see just to the left of the picture there.
There does seem to be a fairly sturdy fence.
Yeah.
Aye, and we can't place conditions on landowners out with the application site anyway, Jim.
Indeed, Chair. Okay, thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. Okay, Chris, that seems to be all the questions for you as case officer. There's been no representations at all, according to our committee paper, so we're in session, members. Councillor Dryborough has said he's content with the recommendations of this report. Is that the feeling of all members?
Yeah, happy to move that if you want, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McKee. If there are no alternative proposals, Tracy, can you confirm the decision, the unanimous decision of the committee, please?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Members have agreed to approve the application subject to the conditions as detailed in the report.
Thank you very much, Tracy. That concludes business for today. I'd like to offer my grateful thanks to staff and members for their involvement throughout the year. Can I wish you a very peaceful time and a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and I look forward to seeing everybody again in the new year. Thank you very much.
Same to you, Chairman. All
Thank
the
you
best,
very much.
Thank you,
everybody.
Chair.